So, Pat, a lot to talk with you about today. We'll get into your latest album, but I actually want to start with your testimony. I don't know a lot about your faith journey, and I'd love to dig in there. I know it's such a loaded question to launch with, but what was your path to faith?
Yeah. My dad's a pastor, so I grew up in the church and had a pretty church event filled life. I was
Is
in
that
everything.
tough being a pastor's kid?
I don't, I've heard like the horror stories of it. I don't have that. My dad is amazing, and my journey honestly was more of when I decided for myself whether I was going to be a disciple and a follower of Jesus on my own, and not live off my parents' faith. Um,
Yeah.
and that kind of happened for me around the end of middle school. So like eighth grade, I was 13, 14, somewhere in there.
That's a pivotal
And
time, right? I mean, that's when you
yeah,
kind of
it's
start making
huge.
those decisions.
Yeah, I mean, and honestly, so much of my story I feel like was connected to our peer group as well. Like I had a group of friends that we all had this moment, this spark of faith for us around the same time, and those have been some of my best friends even through my life right now, which is pretty amazing. So like I know there's always the individual story, but I really was in a community and in a group of friends that we all said yes to Jesus together and started writing music and um, had just a camaraderie and a friendship that was filled with encouragement and challenge and faith and walking together through life.
That's pretty cool. Like being able to have that so early on. And I had a similar experience. My best friend still is my friend from youth group, right? When we were kids.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
so it's interesting when you kind of journey with people through life, in that way. So you started writing music, as you were saying, kind of early and coming out of middle school, making that decision for Jesus. When did you realize, like, hey, not only do I love making music, I'm actually really good at it. This is a gift that God's given me.
See, well, I don't know if I've ever felt like I'm really good at it, but I knew, even like the first time I got an electric guitar for Christmas and I was forced to start taking lessons. Like music has always been an interest. My house was always filled with music, and even though my dad's a pastor, I don't, it kind of depends on what denomination you grew up in. Like my house was filled with classic rock, you know, Clapton, Jimi Hendrix, I mean everything. Like so music was already like it's such a huge part of my life just because of going through my dad's records, but also like obviously when you're in church, the most live music I ever heard growing up was in church, and I was in church a lot. So there was always this interest there. Like I always loved it, and was in like garage bands in middle school where we just get some kids together in the neighborhood and just play. So there was already like that. It was already fun to me, and it really wasn't until um, my the beginning of me saying yes to God for myself when I realized like, wow, someone has been writing the songs that I've been singing in this church. And there's just like there was always like a wonder there, like, wow, I wonder if I was to sit down and write my own music to God, what would I feel? I wonder if I'd feel something similar in my own life to what I feel singing these other people's songs. And so early on, songwriting became this invitation to communion a little bit. It wasn't ever like, oh, write songs and then have a career or anything like that. It was just like, you love music. And now you've had this pretty significant moment in your life, this fork in the road, and naturally music accompanies those things. You just, as a musician, I just ushered all those feelings into song. And I still do that. Like anytime I put an album out, it's because like, wow, I needed this song at some point to sing to
It
God.
ministers to you as
Yeah,
much as it is to other people.
completely. So I can trace those roots back like really far as well.
See that to me, that is, any profession, whether it's music, no matter what it is, if it's something you really love doing and you feel like it's speaking to you in some way and you're actually not selfishly, right? But you're pulling something out of it, that those tend to be the people who do the best in their craft because it means something to them too, right? It's not just something you're doing because you're trying to make money or you're trying to, there's a
Right.
deeper meaning for you there. And I think that shows through in your work. But if you could go back as you were going through that journey and feeling the things you were feeling about those songs and then creating your own music, would you have ever thought that it would have become something that was your life and your career the way it is now?
That's a great question. I feel like back, I'm 13 years old. Well, I can go forward a little bit. Even in high school, I was like leading worship at these youth group weekends that were happening in the Southeast. And kind of did that through college too. It wasn't ever enough to make a full career go out of it, but it was funny. It was always this desire in my heart to just lead in that way, serve at a campus ministry or whatever, lead worship at a youth weekend or a youth camp. Um, I always I watched as that interest and that curiosity and that love just slowly began to like establish itself enough that I was like, oh, I think I could like just like when college is done, just keep doing this maybe. So, and I went to UGA, so I was like studying. I graduated with a speech comm degree from the University of Georgia. So, I'm not sure how many options open themselves up right away based on such a specialized craft of education. But yeah, I don't know. It was kind of this like this easy transition into that phase of my life.
Yeah. Well, and I always like asking people who create, there's Christian music, there's worship music, there's the two melding together, obviously. When it comes to worship and just what goes into that, how difficult is it to come up with lyrics and music that you feel really does create that experience that isn't just, you know, a razor thin sort of experience, paper thin experience, but that is
Yeah.
one that goes really deep. Like how do you get there in creating that music?
I think you can get there in creativity if you go there in your own life. And I mean when you when you read the scriptures, you're not just usually getting some you use the word paper thin. I love that. There's depth and there's pain and there's disappointment and there's loss and there's miracles and like the spectrum of human experience that you find in the scriptures is actually very it it's almost too honest at points. Like we love King David, we love the Psalms. All the Psalms are not beautiful. A lot of them are really painful. And I think when you find that God meets you in all those places as well, it just opens up um anything can become a means to connection with God, not just certain subject matter and not just certain types of songs and not just, what you would expect to hear. Because there's a lot of things in scripture you don't expect to hear.
Yeah.
And God meets people in those places as well. So I found that for me, like all of a sudden, things don't feel as narrow or difficult to write about when I just say, okay, God, this is what's happening in my life. These are the things I'm worried about. These are the things I'm happy about. These are the things I don't know what to do. I have 3 kids. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm trying my
We
best.
can all relate to that. Any
You know what
parent
I
can
mean?
relate to that.
Yeah. So I've just truly, I'm not trying to give the easy answer, but I've found such joy when I just take whatever it is I'm going through and I just give it to God and I sing about it. And
Yeah.
it does mean that 99% of everything I write will never go on an album because it's too weird. But it does mean that I'm in a practice of like, okay, I'm feeling this, I give it to God. I'm feeling this,
Yeah.
okay, I'm just gonna sing this. And it's been my way of handing that stuff over and been like a conduit to trust.
Yeah. I don't actually think that is an easy answer. I think that's actually a really honest answer and it's an authentic answer because, like you were saying, not everything is sort of whitewashed in scripture. There's a lot of difficult moments, a lot of tough things that are dealt with, and they're things that we can relate to because the human experience is messy and sin is crazy, and you see how that plays out in
Yeah.
scripture as well. And so, there's a lot to sing about. But what kind of responsibility do you feel? Let me ask you this, because the music is hitting people and you have intention with that. What is
Mhm.
that part of the process like? Is it difficult just knowing like this is going to have an impact on people in some way?
Yeah, gosh, it's like the classic question of like when when you sing songs, you're singing theology for people to remember, but you're also inviting people to maybe feel some things they haven't let themselves feel as well. And I know sometimes the more, I guess, academic and on paper theological side of things. So sometimes like poetry doesn't always read like systematic theology, but they can talk about the same subject matter from different angles. And I think that's why I feel immense responsibility. And my primary responsibility is to be honest with God and not hide.
Yeah.
And then, no one's forcing me to put out music. No one's like bending my arm. Like I'm putting out songs because I'm like, okay, wow, this has been something that's helped open something up in my heart or open my eyes to find God in areas I didn't expect to find, I do all that by choice. And so my responsibility, I choose to share things that have helped me in my discipleship to Jesus and my trust in God. And sometimes it's poetic and I have had people get upset about that. They wish I would have said something else. Wish you would have been more like explicit in the songs about certain subject matter instead of implicit. But again, when I read the scriptures, there's so many, you know, you see Jesus enter into every area of our life. He's preaching in a synagogue, but then he's like actually just sharing stories and helping people see God in their normal life going down the road. And I find that when songs can do both of those things, I feel so, I don't know, it excites me because you start to realize like, wow, you can find God everywhere.
Yeah.
Um,
No, absolutely. And you have your latest album Shelter out. It came out in October, and it's beautiful music, but let me ask you, from your perspective, putting this music together, how did it differ? How did the process differ? How did the final product differ from your past albums and music?
yeah, this was this album was so fun to make because for the first time in a long time, we rented out a studio in Nashville. RCA Studios, it's like really iconic, historic place where music's been made for a long time, right? And we got in a room with a group of guys I just really trust, and the songwriting had happened like a couple years prior, leading up to we felt like we had the songs that were right, and then we just got in a room together and we played and we sang our guts out, and it was I shared a little bit about being in garage bands when I was like 14. It weirdly felt like that. It felt like the way I've always loved playing music in a room with people working through stuff. And I know it may sound to anyone hearing this, you're like, wow, isn't that what you always do? Like, not always. Like in the modern era, you can make an entire album and never be in the room with another human being, actually.
It's kind of
So
crazy. It
it
really
is.
is.
It is so crazy. So there was a camaraderie and a friendship happening all through the record that it was just beautiful to me. Jonathan Smith produced it and did such an amazing job. Um, and I wrote with so many people who are like my heroes, like some of my favorite songwriters. I wrote with on this record. So I just all through it wasn't just meaningful. It was so fun.
Well, based on the topics that you cover on the album and the contents, what for you is success? What do you want people who pick up the album, they listen to it, they're done with the music, they've heard it. What do you want them to think and feel?
Wow, success, I guess that's a different question than what I hope they think and feel. Like, I think success for me would be the Success would mean that I put out a record that I'm proud of. And what makes me proud is if I'm present to my own life and I'm present to my kids and I am you know, engaged and awake to my own life and I'm finding God there. Like that is a very successful life to me. If you can do those things. And what do I hope people experience? I hope people experience, almost just like an invitation from God. And these songs, so many of these songs are written out of scripture and I do that because it reminds me that I'm a part of something really old.
Yeah.
And this subject matter is not something I came up with. It's not like a new idea. And I find great comfort in that. And so I hope people feel like the invitation to walk with God who's been here for a long time. He knows what he's doing. Isn't anything he
Well,
hasn't seen or can't, imagine into. And because of that, he can be trusted. So I hope people feel that.
well, I love that. And I appreciate you taking the time today joining us. The album is Shelter. Thanks so much.